I think it's probably safe to start. So, do we have any public comment? Anybody? I like your uniform that you got on today. It's like your work clothes. Yeah.
Chief can tell me painted today.
Okay, no public comments, so we'll go with the Instructional Council update.
Great. First of all, I just want to say my name is Jonathan Harper, and I'd like to invite Dr. Gunnell up here to do the Instructional Council update. If I could just give a quick overview of the agenda first, just for the record.
Oh, that'd be great.
So we'll do, Dr. Gunnell will provide an Instructional Council update, and then we do have a report to the board today regarding summer school, an overview update. So Ms. Alex Watson will be coming up to kind of tee up the data for us, and then we'll have a comment from Mr. Lewis, Dr. Nelson, and Ms. Cheney and Mr. Beresford in regards to both high school, middle school, and elementary school. Ms. Cheney then will transition into a description of our third grade plan for the year, and then followed up with the closing comments and an overview of some possible future topics by Dr. Gorman. So,
Hi, fantastic.
Good afternoon, distinguished board members. I have an update on Instructional Council. I think in your packet you have the dates, if you want me to read them. But the first date is Thursday, September 19th. We're meeting on all those dates at Martin Luther King Academy from 1 to 3 p.m. It will be at the Media Center. The GREA chairs for Instructional Council are Laura Morrison and Jane Neiman. And I think that's about it. We're planning our first meeting on September 19th. Might you have any questions?
Both of them can know that they're invited to come to this meeting.
Yes.
To present. Oh,
Jane's
hey.
here.
Okay, so good to see you. I didn't see you there. All right.
And
So,
so
yeah,
we'll be
that's good.
keeping you updated
Okay.
on the meetings and what transpires.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gunnell. And then, so for the reports to the board, I'd like to invite Alex Watson up, and we'll go ahead and tee up your thing. There we go.
All right. Good afternoon. I am going to be providing a brief overview of what summer school looked like, as well as an overview of what the resulting evaluation will look like that will be completed near the end of the calendar year, so roughly December, January. As Jonathan talked about, I'll be talking briefly about what the high school summer school program looked like, as well as additions to Mr. Lewis, who will come up and speak a little bit more to that, what the middle school program looked like, as well as Dr. Nelson will come up and speak as well. And then lastly, elementary, which Bridget and Matthew will speak to. So just as an overview of what the evaluation will look like, it's evaluation of summer school is both a process and outcome evaluation. Process really looking at program operation, how it was implemented, if it was implemented as planned, and then also looking at fidelity because it was expanded to more sites than it has been in years past. We really want to look at whether it was implemented consistently across sites and looking at any trends in that way. And then also the outcome evaluation, we obviously want to know what the impact was, especially if it had our intended impact on academic achievement, specifically with the second grade students, those reading at proficiency levels, middle school looking at math, reading, and the social emotional outcomes, and then in high school, the credit recovery and the students who either graduated as summer graduates or who were on track that weren't at the beginning of the summer. Below is just an overview of the timeline so that the evaluation took place. The evaluation is ongoing. There's been activities that have been started at the start of the summer school program, from administering surveys at the start, doing program observations throughout the program, and then doing summer staff interviews as well as all of the different surveys with guardians and students themselves. And then right now in September, December, it's really going through and actually preparing the data to be analyzed and interpreted for that final full evaluation report that will be prepared and completed in December. So that's just an overview of what to expect in the coming evaluation. And then we want to provide an overview of what each of the programs looked like, starting with high school. Mr. Lewis is going to join me as well. So the summer school program operated from June 17th through July 18th for high school, middle school, and elementary. The times slightly differed. For high school, it operated from 7:30 in the morning until 12:45 p.m. with 2 sessions. The focus for the high school program was on credit recovery. So that occurred through both online e-2020 as well as through traditional classroom instruction. There was also a newcomer-specific program that operated during the 2 sessions as well. The evaluation includes the measures that you'll see down on the right-hand side, looking at student, staff, and guardian surveys to really get perceived impact. Do students feel as though it was helpful to them? What did they feel as though was impactful? Then also looking at satisfaction, what could be improved about the program? What worked well, and then also those outcome measures, looking at the number of courses completed along with the credits earned, and then also graduation status. How many students are now on track to graduate in 4 or 5 years versus when the program or when they started the summer, and how many students graduated at the end of the summer that wouldn't have without the program. I also wanted to note that in the middle school and elementary slides, you'll see attendance data that's presented for the summer school program specifically. This isn't presented on the high school program because it's not an accurate measure of dosage or success, because students will complete the courses at their own pace. So one student could complete a course in 5 days, or the other could take the full 19 days to complete. So it just isn't an accurate measure.
So good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to report out on the high school end of course completion for summer school. We had 2 facets that students participated in. One would be online learning, and the other one would be traditional study. So what I pulled together for you guys and gathered the data, we had 361 courses completed as it relates to traditional classrooms studies. We had English had 200, and we had math with 141 students who finished, and then history had 20 students. The type of courses that were offered for traditional coursework, for newcomers, we had language, literature and analysis, and math. We had English 9 through 12, geometry, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and U.S. history for 9th graders. Most of the focus for traditional study was for 9th graders because they don't always do as, or they're not as successful in online learning programs as they would be in traditional classrooms based on history. All right, so online learning aspect, we had a total of 221 students that completed coursework. Math had 72. Science had 66, English had 39, social studies had 34, and then 10 elective offerings. Those courses included English, geometry, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, biology, chemistry, computer application, which is an elective offering, as well as sociology, U.S. government, career skills, which is another elective offering, world history, physics, Spanish, psychology, economics, strategies for academic success, and U.S. history. So we had a broad scope of course offerings to ensure that the students within the programs were able to meet the needs that they needed as it relates to courses that they may have to recover. And also making sure the seniors that were in the program had enough offerings to graduate from the program itself. Summer school was held July 18th at 11 o'clock. We had 19 grads. Innovation Central graduated 6 students. We had 1 homebound student. We had Gramps Learning Center had 5. Ottawa Hills had 2. Union had 1. And then we had 4 students graduate from Southeast Career Pathways. So that was the graduation. It was a very good graduation. Miss Lewis was present at the graduation ceremony. And most of the students that actually graduated were fourth-year students. So it'll affect our graduation rate for this upcoming school year. Any questions?
Any questions about high school? I just had a couple math questions. So I saw 433 students took took summer courses, and evidently some of them took traditional and online.
Correct.
Okay.
Traditional online, and some took multiple courses as well.
Okay. And then the elective courses, so there's a lot of elective courses. So in terms of credit recovery, so these are just students needed a certain number of credits to get towards graduation, and they just were able to choose some options.
Yeah, so they would have elective offerings that were required as it relates to graduation requirements on the transcript, and those are some of the courses that are offered on online programming.
Okay.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Now I'm going to speak about the middle school program. Similarly, this program operated for 5 weeks, June 17th through July 18th, from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. So it was for a total of 95 hours because of the July 4th, which is taken off, so 19 days total. That's important to note because evidence or research indicates that in order for a summer school program to be effective, students should be attending at least 80 hours. So we put that 95-hour threshold so that a student could miss up to 3 days and still be getting that 80 hours. So I have the higher likelihood of really being effective and being impactful on that student. And this is similar for the elementary program. So the focus for the middle school program was on ELA, math, and social emotional learning. There was 2 sessions. Students would either rotate through starting at ELA or math and then end the day with the SEL session or activity, and that occurred every day. There was additional programming for EL students that extended after lunch from 1 to 2:30. Eligibility was based on a student's reading assessment score at the 69th percentile or below, or their grade after the first marking period. They also had, if they had a WIDA score of entering emerging for those English learner students, that was also an eligibility criteria. Total, 271 students participated in 6th through 8th grade. It was broken up pretty evenly between the grades. The largest proportion were 8th grade students at 38%. Otherwise, it was 29% 6th grade and 33% of 7th grade, so pretty consistent breakdown. The majority of students attended between 16 to 19 days, 67%. So that's important because we know that they're reading that 80-hour threshold. The success measures, those are what are going to be included in that evaluation report that I mentioned. That will include the student, staff, and guardian surveys, similarly to look at the perceived impact as well as satisfaction. The class observations that were done using protocols, so really looking at specific attributes of the curriculum, how students are engaging with it, what is working well, what could be improved. The math and reading MAP scores of the previous spring semester and this fall semester to really look at what change occurred during the summer. And then also student SEL pre and post surveys.
Excellent. Good afternoon. So the middle school, we decided to implement the social and emotional learning program into our middle school summer school. And the students had a pretty structured schedule on a daily basis. So after breakfast, they would come in and meet with their small community for 5 minutes as a check-in. They would go on to their math lesson for 85 minutes, their English lesson for 90 minutes, and then they would have a wrap-up with their social and emotional learning for 45 minutes. In terms of their academics with math and English, the lessons were based on specific learning targets and skills in both ELA and mathematics. Learning targets were posted in classrooms and with direct instruction and activities. Each student maintain a folder with evidence and artifacts based on the tasks and activities from each of those learning targets. And percentages were given to each student based on what they had learned and mastered for each of those learning targets. So in terms of the social and emotional learning sessions, there were 19 lessons, and based on Panorama, which is our social and emotional learning program, and those 19 lessons were based on 5 components, and those components are self-maintenance, self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness. And with those 19 lessons, there were activities with the students in order for them to connect the content to either with summer school and what they were doing, or maybe even to pull in some experiences that they had in their own lives, in their personal lives. And like Alex said, there were pre and post surveys with the SEL, and those are shown.
So the SEL surveys that were developed, as Dr. Nelson presented, using Panorama. So Panorama is already implemented at a handful of schools. So we took a subset of the questions that were already presented on that survey, and the questions fell within these 3 success or measures of SEL: self-management, social awareness, or sense of belonging. This is just a high-level overview of what the results are indicating. The breakdown will be presented in more detail in the full evaluation report. But self-management, there was a higher proportion of students who responded favorably to all 6 of the measures when comparing from the start of the program to the end. Social awareness, there's a higher proportion of students who responded favorably to half of the measures. And then sense of belonging, a higher proportion of students who responded favorably to 2 of the 4. And then there was an equal number of 1 of the 4 measures. So still higher equal proportion on 3 of the 4 measures. And when I say measures, that's just the survey questions. Like I said, that will be presented in much more detail in the report. But it is showing promising results, especially with self-management and sense of belonging, which we feel as though could have a larger impact, especially during 5 weeks. Social awareness is a longer-term goal that 5 weeks may not be able to handle, but at least be able to see this promising data.
Any questions?
Yeah.
I just wondered who was leading the social emotional portion of summer school. Were those teachers or counselors or?
There were teachers, youth advocates, deans of students. There were many different faculty members, staff members, and really to present the information. It really was, don't get me wrong, the information was wonderful information, but the person that brought that experience to the kids generally brought more of their experience. And when you bring your experience into the classroom or to children, they're more willing to connect with you.
And is there going to be any follow-up as far as these kids met with a group and connected with that adult? Was there plans to like follow up with that relationship or those relationships that were built or anything like that?
Not at this time, but that would be a fantastic
Yeah, I just think this
way
program's
to
wonderful.
pull them back together and connect. Correct.
Yeah.
I think comparable to what we're doing with the 3rd grade reading piece that you'll hear about with the elementary folks. A handoff is a large component of this work, so it doesn't make sense to do something in the summer and then not monitor it throughout the school year or see what was learned throughout the school year. So that is a great question. We will ensure that this work isn't done in a silo or in a vacuum, and that we will monitor these students throughout the school year. And you will hear in the elementary example how that's happening with the reading piece, but it needs to happen with this piece as well. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think will help is that we go back to who the students are that are participating in it. So, and Dr. Gorman, that's not Dr. Gorman, is it?
You're all good.
Who the students were. So the students that were eligible were those that were below the 69th percentile.
At or below, yes.
At or below, which is actually fairly high, right? I mean, fairly high academically performing. So who are this? So then, were there students invited? How were they? How were these students? Who were the students?
Encouraged.
Yeah, encouraged, whatever. Because I mean, being eligible doesn't mean that the students automatically showed.
So Alex, can you speak to the selection process, or else Dr. Gunn, she oversaw middle schools last year, or Natasha Neal, Mr. Malak?
Students were invited to attend, and their parents also were given the opportunity to say, yes, my child will attend.
So all middle school students that were below that 69th percentile, or students that were identified by the school?
Students that were below the 69th percentile.
Okay, so all students below the 69th percentile were invited to consider.
And also,
I mean, because that seems, again, that seems kind of high.
Mr. Atkins, if you take a little bit of time to get down here, he'll explain.
Yeah. We, you know, we don't need to get home in time for dinner or anything.
here, you can sit down.
So good afternoon. And so, if I understand the question right, was asking who was invited. And so principals have some flexibility in their list. And we want to have, not just coming from central office, but we want to give principals and their teams just some say in, you know, who's the best fit. Because there's some things we can say on paper, here's your percentage, but they know the families, and they know much more than we know at this level. And so everyone had a number of slots per school based off your size. And then so a school may had, I'm making this up, a school may had 50 slots at their school, but it was 100 kids that were eligible on their list. And so they determined off their eligibility list who they're going to send the enrollment forms to.
Okay, and then, okay, so that helps. And then secondly, then, since social emotional learning was part of the curriculum, basically, there was an assessment ahead of time that part of the students' need was to improve on their social emotional learning skills.
So
and that's why it was put in there.
Well, some of the schools, and this is a continuation of what we're trying to do in the school year with these with our restorative practices. And so it was mentioned we use Panorama as the survey. And so what we did is we do have 10 schools last year that took the Panorama survey, grades 3 and up. And it shows you kind of what the kids, what they're saying, how they feel, their sense of belonging, their grit, and things of that nature. And so we took that learning from there and applied it to summer school, and we continue to do this in the school year as well, for this year as well.
Well, I mean, I think that this data looks good. That's the reason I'm asking all these questions is to try to get a sense of who the kids were. So basically, though, they were all voluntarily there. None of the kids weren't coming because if they didn't come, they were held back.
No. It's not the case. And so high school is the only one that has credits really
That's what I was thinking.
attached to this one. And so, we strongly encourage students to come to, one, catch up if anything you missed last year, but it's kind of a look ahead to getting ready for this school year as well.
Okay. I think that considering, the data on attendance, 67% made 16 or 19 days. And I know because I run a program in the summer too with high school students, and it's really hard to get kids to programs in the summertime because all sorts of stuff is happening. And the fact that they're voluntarily, these are 12-year-olds who are voluntarily get to school. And so I think that what's most encouraging also is this sense of belonging being connected to that. If they're only coming 17, 18 days in June because they feel like that there's some sense of belonging. Otherwise, they're not going to come. So anyways, that's impressive. So, okay, that helps.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm really sorry, and I should have asked this sooner, but I don't know if I've met you before. What is your name?
Oh, Alexandra Watson. I'm the Grant and Research Specialist. Alexandra. Alex for short.
How do you pronounce Malongi's name?
So last, we're going to talk about the elementary program, which was really the second grade summer program. The focus was very targeted with traditional classroom instruction focused on literacy. And this was specifically in relation to the third grade reading law. So these were second grade students rising up to third grade in this fall. There was an expanded number of program sites at 9 different buildings. And then the eligibility, similar to the middle school students, was second grade students at or below the 69th percentile in reading, also taking a WIDA entering or emerging score for the English learner students. Similarly, this program operated for the 95 hours, and for the EL students, there was the additional programming from 1 to 2:30. A total of 423 second grade students participated, and you can see a similar attendance rate of 69% attended that 16 to 19 days, so getting that at least 80 hours. In the evaluation, the success measures that are included are similar to the middle school program with the student, staff, and guardian surveys. The student surveys, because they are second grade students, were very brief, 4 questions, really asking if their perception or perceived impact of the program, as well as what they liked about the program. So really getting at high level questions. Class observations, using a specific protocol, looking at the curriculum, student engagement, and then looking at really reading maps, spring and fall scores, and then M-STEP reading scores. Also looking at Imagine Learning, that was a program used throughout the summer that has kind of interim assessments, not necessarily assessments, but will show some data on their progress throughout the summer, because we know that the assessment or standardized assessments occur either later on in the spring or in the fall when there's already been some other time lost, so they give some interim data points as well.
Good afternoon, distinguished board members. Thanks for having us here.
Yes.
And Alex did such a nice job reporting out on the second grade summer school that we don't have a lot of additional information for you, except we do want to highlight, yes, that 423 students attended, and definitely any student 69th percentile or below we wanted to see there, because we know that 60th percentile is what we look at as far as grade level proxy, as far as having that higher likeliness of being proficient on the M-STEP. And teachers selection this year looked a little bit different as well. We wanted to make sure that we had the highest quality teachers in front of our students this summer. And so they had to have a proven track record of the ability to connect with students. So very much looking at engagement and building relationships, because as we have students going to different sites, we want to make sure that there's that quick connection with teachers and they're able to really begin learning day number 1. So that was a piece of it. They also needed to have positive math reading CGI for the last 3 years. So we were looking at teachers that had good growth, positive growth with their students each year for the last 3 years on the math test. And then the relatability as well. Because developmentally, if I teach kindergarten, the jump to second grade could be a little bit of a stretch for me, or same thing if I look at fifth grade, a fifth grade teacher teaching incoming third graders as well. So some people can make that developmental change very quickly, and some it's a little bit harder for. So we took all 3 of those things into consideration, and we did have 33 teachers that taught in the summer school program.
Just that this was really purposely designed for the student groups that's first impacted by this law, and that a lot of barriers were removed by making so many sites around the city in our elementaries, where traditionally the last few years we've only run 3 elementary sites around the city.
And then if we want to talk about the pre and post assessment as far as that fall handoff. So as the kids enter this third grade year, what does that look like? I attended summer school. How does my third grade teacher know what I did, how I did, and where to meet me exactly where I am instructionally? So there was a spreadsheet that was created and filled out by the teachers, and the principal oversaw that as well at our summer school sites, and that data collection occurred as far as the pre and post assessments. And the really nice thing about this post assessment was it was a cold read, and the students had to apply the strategies as they took this post assessment that they had been working so diligently on throughout the program. So it was very much that transferability. Did what I learned here in summer school right now in these few weeks allow me to transfer and use that strategy when I'm looking at something brand new, to read and answer some comprehension questions and a writing prompt as well. So that was a wonderful way to be able to assess whether they can do, they can apply the strategy, not just do I have rote memory skills. So that was a great thing for that. And that data that's on the spreadsheet will be forwarded on to that incoming third grade teacher, or accepting, receiving third grade teacher, so that they have some idea of where that child left off at the end of summer school.
Now, this question's a little bit off, but how much were these teachers paid? Were they paid by the hour based on their?
That's a great point, because there was an increase on it.
Yep, they were paid hourly, $60 an hour.
How much?
60,
Oh, good.
yeah, $60 an hour, because we know that childcare costs are expensive, and you know, to be able to come.
And
in
most of them
with
were 4
additional,
hours a
so
day?
They did. Some transferred into the
Afternoon
ELL portion of it as well. So.
But that was a shift for our district too, because in past years it was $25 an hour. And with this shortened summer that all our teachers have, you know, there just wasn't as much participation or buy-in. And so we knew we had to compensate appropriately for that precious time of their summer.
So that's good. Good. We saw a lot of engagement. Classroom observations were tremendous. So we're excited. We're very excited about it. Awesome.
Sounds like a great outcome. So, and then you'll be obviously then seeing how these kids do in the fall and spring.
We are anxiously awaiting.
When
Yeah, I
do they
bet.
get the results for the fall map?
So they are taking that test right now, and I know Alex, I think referenced in December is when you'll have that data pulled together.
Yep, so everything for the full evaluation report.
And then will there be like a peer assessment, like peers that were not in summer school?
There will be for the second grade students, comparing students that were eligible but didn't participate, so still at that 69th percentile or below,
Okay.
just as doing that as kind of a proxy to compare to.
That would be, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, great work.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And that is the last piece on summer school.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I just wanted to make sure. I know this is a scary thing, you probably want to see it because it looks pretty daunting, this big page of, and I think that's in your packet as well, the Read by Grade 3 plan. And like I say, it looks daunting, but we wanted to make sure that you had both pieces, the what and the how of what we're speaking with teachers about as far as this reading plan that we have rolled out. There are some things that are the same, and there are some things that we tweaked a little bit for this year moving forward. So the front page is what we call the what, and these are the anchor standards that our teachers are expected to be able to teach our children, to have them proficient by the third grade. As we know, the standards build, Common Core state standards build from K all the way up. But these are the 10, or not the 10, but they're numbered here anyway. To go down, there are 10 that are more comprehension, and 4 that are more of the foundational type skills. And so to be able to teach them with fidelity across each and every classroom is what we're expecting for teachers, all teachers, but especially right now the K through 3, to make sure that our kids are proficient by the end of that third grade.
And the foundational skills are started on the first day of pre-K, and so those 4 skills are supported, especially in the pre-K, K1 years.
Yeah, so parent resources. So one of the things that we've really took a look at is what do we give parents to help their kids at home that can be quick and easy, that can really enhance the skills prior to either them coming to school, so the pre-K age, if you will, and then as they build throughout. So how do we look at making sure that every single family has that Dolch list that is supposed to be at their grade level, right? So what are the red words, or sometimes we call them popcorn words in the younger grades? And how, as a parent, do I practice those with my child each and every day? The reading logs, making sure that we have texts at home that parents can read with their children, to their children, and ask those comprehension questions. So that's the first page there, and then we moved into the how, and that is, what should a reading lesson look like? So what is the best way to make sure that we're applying these best practices? A gradual release? How long should a mini lesson be to make sure that we have tremendous student engagement all the way through, not kids sitting on the carpet for 45 minutes and things of that nature, and making the most of the data that we have. So the summer school data, the fall map data, how do I start to group children and make sure that I'm teaching exactly what each child needs? So that's what this back page is as well, is what is that how to get to the what that was on the front page. And you know, we wanted to put this out here so it can be a conversation moving forward, right? What questions do you have? What are some of the things that you're seeing happening in some of the kids' homes, if you have access to those conversations and things like that? And then the individualized reading improvement plan, which we call lovingly the IRIP, and what that looks like for families and children and teachers as well. And so that's the bottom third of the page and how that looks. And we look at the 60th percentile on the MAP reading, and children that do not hit that 60th percentile get an individualized reading improvement plan. So how do I help the child get exactly where they need to be on which skills? So it's not just throwing everything at the child, but which discrete skills do we know that they need to enhance? And how do we supplement, augment, and support that? And so that's
Do you know where the 67% came from as far as?
the 60th percentile?
Well, you said 67%, something about the 67% percentile.
The 60th percentile is,
Okay.
yes.
So
yes.
that is where the kid has to be in math and in reading. And then if he or she is not at that level, we'll do these extra things for him.
For reading, yes, this prompts that individualized reading plan.
Okay.
And the 60th percentile for us, because it is what we talk about as that grade level proxy for us, is how we arrived at that. So we know if you are hitting that target of the 60th national percentile, you have a much greater likeliness of being proficient on the M step when you take that. So that was our trigger point for that.
So after the MAP window closes in another week or so, we're through the first 30 days of school, and then an additional 30 starts, and that's where we do a diagnostic or an extensive one-on-one with the student to figure out where is that gap skill that we need to focus on first to move their literacy skills. And that's what the foundation of the IRIP, that information goes into the IRIP.
So it's that plan that will follow the child, and as they are progress monitored throughout the year and master the skill, fantastic, move on to the next. And so the IRIPs are very flexible and fluid as the children progress in their skills. The IRIP can reflect that. They are, like I say, progress monitored throughout the year. Every 4 to 5 weeks, children that are on an IRIP. That information is shared with parents, and there is an at-home reading plan for children on this individualized plan so that parents can join with us and partner with us to help their child at home as well.
What is realistically going to happen to these kids who don't make it?
Good question. Good question.
We're going to kind of just talk about that in the next section and get a sense of how many that might be. Any questions on this? So, like the IRIP, this is new, right? This individualized reading plan?
It's new within the last 2 years.
Within the last 2 years, okay.
Yes. Yep.
And so I know that there have been some of this stuff on the instruction seems familiar, but a specific plan for. So to some extent that the third grade reading legislation might have been positive in forcing us to do this, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really forced us into the documentation piece as well. Some of this we had done in the past, but really were we diligent with the documentation piece? So it's been great for kind of pushing us in that direction.
I knew as a teacher I was differentiating and had a plan for each of my students, but not really a formal system to document the plan, and now we can.
It seems like there were like classroom level discussions of how to impact moving the classroom measurement up, but not necessarily at the individual student level. Yeah.
Yes.
And this works really well with the way, I think that the MAP discussion with parents has been very helpful.
Absolutely.
And having this connected to that. At the third grade, I know it's different as the kids get older, but at the third grade level, parents are paying attention to that, so. it's
Very much
helpful.
so. Very much so. And it is true, I think Dr. Gorman will hit upon that information that you were just wondering about, so. Any other questions?
Okay.
My only question was, who implements these 30-minute targeted interventions? Is that someone outside of the classroom teacher?
It is the classroom teacher. In some cases, we have paraprofessionals as well, but the kids who are identified as having an individualized reading plan, we want the teacher to work with them as that first line of intervention because they are the most highly qualified, and we know that that is for sure the best practice is to have the most highly qualified person. So if we do have a para that pushes into the classroom during that time, then they work with the kids who are not on that 60th percentile or below. So it is the teacher that performs that intervention.
Okay.
So these individual reading plans, though, as it implies, they're each individual. So what if a teacher has 5 or 6 different kids in the classroom that have these individual programs? How does that work out when, I imagine each kid could be deficient in something?
They could, yes, but the great thing about reading is there are a few very high leverage and high yielding strategies that can work for several different discrete skill areas. So if the 5 of us had the same skill that was lacking perhaps, then I could group that group together and work. So you can very much group your kids together by the skills that are deficient and employ one of the high leverage strategies that works there. And then the at-home reading program that is sent home is very targeted for that child. So exactly the reading level and the comprehension questions that go with it.
Okay, and the teacher knows who needs what
Yes.
and what exactly needs to be done for that kid or child. And what happens, what happens if the kids just don't make it? I mean, I'm not saying, but what, if you work with a kid on strategies, I remember this from the old days and working on parts of speech with kids, some kids just never going to get it. Sounds awful, but it might be the truth. And so what happens with kids who maybe can't make it?
So if kids continue to struggle and they're not, the part of the progress monitoring is, are they making growth, even small incremental gains? If they're making growth, of course, we're going to continue on. If some kids stagnate, then that triggers that third line of defense, if you will. Or do we take them to the student success team to see if there are perhaps other things that are impeding their ability to grasp that certain skill? And so that's when we move to that tier 3 intervention. So,
but the aides that might help the teachers, will they be trained in these strategies? The aides already trained?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, so I'm the last person who will be before you this evening, so maybe we'll get home in time for dinner.
Lots of questions, though.
Yes.
Have as many, Ms. Downs-Lewis, as many questions as you like. So, Dr. Baker, Ms. Downs-Lewis, Ms. Davis, thank you for allowing us to present to you today. Hopefully you have gotten a better overview of what happened with summer programming. This year, we've had lots of specificity as it relates to summer programming, especially with the third grade reading legislation. So we just want to do everything in our power to ensure that we are not failing lots and lots of third graders, because we know the research about retention that shows that students who are retained often have difficulty as they matriculate to high school, and in many instances, students who are held back do not graduate. So we know the research, but we also are aware of the legislation, and we are going to follow that. As we talk about the areas of focus for the upcoming school year and the areas of focus for possible topics, I would just like to reference a couple of things. One of which is the, of course, increasing proficiency and growth as it relates to the M-STEP assessment. This summer we had some professional learning by Dr. Jeff Hauer from the Equity Institute, and the ultimate goal that was articulated to us, which resonates with me and makes a lot of sense, is proficiency is the goal for our students. And in many instances, I know that we have schools with higher rates of poverty and low rates of proficiency, but we also have in our own school district some schools that have high rates of poverty and high rates of proficiency that are outperforming schools that have lower rates of poverty. So a topic that I would love to share with this group is really highlighting some success stories in our school district where we have high rates of poverty, high rates of English learners, high rates of students with disabilities who are outperforming many peer schools and also outperforming many schools in the region. Secondly, we would like to ensure that more students are college and career ready. For 6 of the last 7 years, we, the Grand Rapids Public Schools, have increased in the area of mathematics and evidence-based reading and writing. Therefore, we've had more students who are college and career ready. Unfortunately, in this last year, we took a dip with college and career readiness. So in 6 of 7 years, we had an increase. We had a dip this year in college and career readiness. That dip has also been noticed in schools in the region, schools in the state. So everyone took a dip this year in college and career readiness. My assumption is some folks would like to attribute that to the many snow days that we had. I'm not going to do that because the students had 12 years of schooling prior to taking the test. So
Now, how do we know? So it's based on the SAT?
Correct. So the SAT results just came out. You probably saw if you were looking at MLive, of course there's a database where you can type in the school's name and you can pull up the school and the results. We, of course, will provide a comprehensive report to you, if that's what you like, on how well we did on SAT, how well we've done the last 7 years on SAT, because 1 year is not going to tell the story. And I firmly believe that school districts that are successful over time, but they also have dips, right? So if you think of a school district that gets lots of recognition, of Charlotte-Mecklenburg, over a 10-year period of time, there were a few dips, but they ultimately reflected and got better on those areas after they had a year where they dipped. You may have noticed yesterday that City was the 4th highest achieving school in the state of Michigan. All other 9 schools out of the top 10 were from the east side of the state. City had the highest rates of poverty, approximately 40% with the top 10 schools. The next highest was close to 20%. The highest achieving school in the state had 1% poverty. City was 4th. So that's a celebration, but as I've said before, we have to ensure that all of our schools have high levels of proficiency and not just 1 or 2. Something that we're very proud of in the Grand Rapids Public Schools over the next 7 years, of course, is the increase in our graduation rates. There was a time 7 years ago where our district had a 44% graduation rate. We made lots of excuses for those graduation rates. And every single year, those rates have gotten better in the last 7 years. Some of the things were out of our control from a graduation rate perspective, but we are around 72% right now from the 44%. We firmly believe, based on some data and matriculating high school students, that we will be at or above the state average in the next 2 years. So the state average, about 80%. Federal average is about 80% as well. So we firmly believe that we will get there. Lastly, of course, this is super important this year, the 3rd grade reading law. And so the cut score of 1252, that means that students are more than a year behind as it relates to reading. If we look at last year's numbers, in the 2019, there are 80 students in the Grand Rapids Public Schools who had a cut score below a 1252. 80 students. 30 of those students, 30 of the 80, would get what the state calls a good cause exemption, which means they've been retained before. They are a student who has moved from another country. They're possibly an English learner. There's maybe a student with a disability. So within that 80, about 30 of the students approximately would get a good cause exemption. Therefore, about 50 kids right now, if you look at last year's numbers, would be in jeopardy or in fear of not being promoted. And so our job is to ensure that we help all students, but we specifically hone in on the students based on the MAP data that were shared earlier to kind of predict who's going to fall short and how can we put interventions in to help those particular students. Lastly, we have, at least in my 22 years in the district, we have not had adequate professional learning as it relates to creating classrooms that are conducive to learning, specifically around classroom management. It's been bits and pieces, it's been principal directed, but this year we want to, as soon as things settle down after opening of schools with enrollment, balancing classes, things of that nature, want to have a real focus on classroom management, having professional learning opportunities for teachers in classroom management, because there are some things that come easier to others and some things that need to be explicitly taught, and we need to provide professional learning opportunities so that we can eliminate distractions in classrooms so that teachers can focus on learning. So those are some potential topics that are in the academic plan that I want you to know about. If these are items on which you want us to focus, we would love to hear that. Dr. Baker, Jonathan Harper, and I, after this meeting, we always debrief on the previous meeting, and then we come up with agenda items. And so these are the areas of focus this year. These are pretty straightforward. You'll notice there is nothing incredibly brand new or innovative, but at the end of the day, these are the metrics by which we are judged, right? Are our students proficient? Are they college ready? Are you graduating your students? And can we ensure that the majority of our students are going to matriculate to the 4th grade and not be held back as a result of this legislation? Any questions?
What is going to happen? I hate to think about it, but there will be kids who don't make it, and I just hate the thought of all these kids.
Sure. So if a student falls below that 1252, the teachers also have portfolios, okay? So within these portfolios, if we can show evidence of proficiency, so let's say a student had a bad testing day and fell below that number, we can go to a portfolio to see if a student was proficient on grade level targets, standards, etc. So we can do that. Unfortunately, if we don't get some students caught up, there may be some students who get retained. You will notice the emphasis we had on summer school this year with a targeted approach. We are ensuring that every single month there's a communication to our families so that they are well aware of their student status. There should not be any surprises. My assumption is the superintendent is going to be the person who's going to have some difficult conversations with families when students are retained, or one of the executive directors or teachers or principals. I'm not looking forward to those conversations, so therefore we need to do everything in our power. We need to ensure that there's awareness, professional learning, to ensure that very few students are retained. But Ms. Downs-Lewis, there may be some students who are retained, and this cut score is really low. This is a really low cut score. Prior to the cut scores coming out from the state, I was thinking the number would be significantly larger, right? Being that we're the biggest game in town, our numbers are larger than a Godfrey Lee, Godwin Heights, Kelloggsville, but they're still dealing with the same challenges.
So so I have a few questions related to this. So the 1250, what would have been, you were assuming what would the score have been based on what your assumption was?
When I look at proficiency rates, so how many of our students are proficient in reading, about 1/3 of our students are meeting those proficiency marks. So if it was exactly proficiency, 2/3 of those students, right? That's what I was thinking. While we have 2/3 of our students are not proficient, therefore we have lots of students who may be held back. My assumption is the state took that into consideration, and that's why the cut score is where it is. It's a much smaller number, a much more manageable number, but even if we help these students become successful, we also have to think of the 2/3 of our kids who are not proficient in reading. And it's not exclusive to the Grand Rapids Public Schools. It's in many districts where there are not high rates of proficiency as it relates to reading and math.
So I have a couple other questions on that,
Absolutely.
but I think want to come back to how what we discuss of this that's on here, and then what I think that I'd like to have a discussion with the other board members about what we think the rest of the board should be aware of and discussing.
Sure.
May I
Yeah.
interject here? So the portfolio would be something that the teachers could show that the students have shown growth.
So the portfolio is another artifact that we can look at to show that students are working toward proficiency. Now, it can't be something where a score is incredibly low, and then we look at a portfolio and we say, well, I think he or she is pretty. There has to be evidence in that portfolio that the student is getting close to what we believe is this particular cut score. It has to have lots of objectivity and less subjectivity. Right.
So, again, I'm just trying to think about what the role of the board is, and this committee and the rest of the board. So these are 5 areas that you've identified as what your focus is. So 2 of the areas, so in terms of looking at metrics that school districts have tended to be, so we got 2 of them on here, or 3 of them, I guess. The 3rd grade reading, and then basically either graduation rates and the SAT rate. And then the other measure was things like middle school math, et cetera. But
Yeah, so M-STEP proficiency, 3 areas. So you
okay,
have,
so that's there. Okay.
yeah, so
So
English,
that's in it too. Okay.
English language arts, mathematics, and social studies.
Okay.
So those were the 3
Okay.
areas on M.
So this is a pretty broad.
Yeah.
It's not really lasered in on 1 or 2 things.
Correct. So there are lots of areas where we can go with this, but these are the metrics by which we are held accountable in the state
Right.
of Michigan.
The college and career ready, I'd like to have, and this is something I think I'd like to have with the fuller board. I think that there is a misunderstanding about what that statistic means.
Sure.
And so the SAT is a score that is used to mark the point of college and career ready. And then oftentimes it gets read as people are graduating without the skills they need to succeed. And there's 2 different things there. And I think that is really important because far more of our students are accepted to college and succeed in college than meet the college and career ready mark. And so I think that's, I mean, the other thing that's also true is that lots of colleges are accepting our students to be eligible and competent enough to become college students that are not meeting that college and career ready score.
A high school
SAT scares me anyway.
A high school transcript is a better predictor of success than an SAT score. Right. I'm not saying this is important, but a student who gets a 4.0 on a transcript, research shows, does better in college than a student with a higher test score. Now, it's optimal to have both, right? But a transcript is a better predictor.
So I think it's important that, but yet that score still means something.
Sure does.
It still means whether or not they get in or whether or not they get money once they do get in, et cetera. So I think it is important that we have that understanding, that the board understands what that means.
Now, what do we do for these kids? Like the one that they take their junior year is
Sure.
the one.
That's
okay?
the SAT.
Yeah.
So
You have the PSAT, which is given in 8th and 9th grade. We use those, I guess you could call them preliminary data, to find out the areas in which students are being successful, the areas on which students are struggling, and then focus on those particular areas so that when students are in 11th grade, we already know the areas on which we need to focus. In all of the high schools, there is either a class or a portion of a class that is connected to SAT. So if you think of some of the comprehensive schools, Union and Ottawa, you have kind of a college readiness class, so to speak, where the curriculum is essentially the areas on which they struggled as a class, and then a more laser focus for individualized students. So there's that piece. We're also focused on knowledge of standards, backwards mapping, and assessment literacy. So we need to ensure that our teachers are teaching the standards that are going to be covered on the assessment. So therefore, our instructors and our principals need to have assessment literacy. And we need to ensure that we cover the entire curriculum because we can't leave anything out.
So any other big issues like that
I just
before we go?
remember. Do we have them take classes, or do we do anything where we teach them to take the test?
We absolutely do. We absolutely do. The classes are focused more on addressing skills gaps than test prep. Test prep is only going to get you so far. Do we incorporate those test prep strategies? Absolutely. I think the difference within the last 7 years to the work we did before was we were heavily focused on test prep, and we got these tiny gains. Now that we're focusing on addressing skills gaps, for example, and I've used this a few times, if I don't know how to use a semicolon, teach me how to use a semicolon. That's a skill that I can take with me. If you tell me circle C every time, I don't know how that's going to help me moving forward. So there may be some technical things that we can address, jumping up a couple of points or so, if I ensure that I finish the test, if I guess I'm picking the same letter every single time, but that's not going to benefit students in the long run. It's the skills that need to be addressed.
From the vantage point of someone who just had 2 kids go through this,
Yeah.
I mean, beginning in 8th grade, there's a lot of, they're taking the PSAT, or before that it was whatever the ACT.
So there used to be, when we did ACT, it was Explore, Plan, and ACT.
Yeah, and so the kids have taken these tests many times, but I know before you took over as academic leader years ago, we weren't even doing that. And so that was one of the first things that were implemented. So there's a lot of familiarity with that
So the
text.
kids, your experience is that the kids, by the time they get to be
and then
juniors.
that 11th grade college and career ready class, they spend a lot of time doing that. So kids don't get to that test surprised. I mean, it doesn't mean that they've gotten past the idea of text anxiety or all that stuff, but there is a lot there's a lot of preparation for going into the test itself and then the skills. But I would say the thing that I think would have the biggest impact in the long run on success on those tests is whether or not those kids learn to read at 3rd grade. So
Absolutely.
That'll make the biggest difference based on what I've seen.
If you looked at the old,
lots of students.
If you looked at the old ACT, the science test was a reading test. It wasn't really a science test.
So, as a board, though, so I think that I'm looking at a couple of things that I think should go beyond the committee. And one is that I do think that the full board needs to understand the 3rd grade reading. This cuts, I mean, a projection. I mean, we've heard a lot about it over the last couple of years. What is the projection? I think it would be nice for the board to hear that we're not talking about hundreds of students. We're talking about dozens of students, perhaps. And I think that that's nice to hear. Although we would still need to know, I mean, you know, Ms. Lewis is asking questions, what will happen to those kids? And so we will need to know. And especially as it relates to board action, which might be that we have to spend money in areas that we haven't spent money before. So we definitely need to be, so that needs to be a discussion that I wouldn't feel comfortable only staying here in this committee. I think other things, I do think that the college and career ready, just because I see a lot of people having conversation on that and misunderstanding what that means, and then also not being able to really think about what kind of work we do. I think that that needs to go. And I think the overall academic plan goals need to go to the full board, because that's what we'll be evaluating the superintendent on, is meeting these goals. I would say in terms of what this committee should do is so it is good that we had a follow-up on the summer school, because we did have back in the spring, this was a new plan, and that was brought to us for our support and approval. So now we're hearing that. So I would like to think about, in terms of topics that we choose, what is it that we need to do as a committee, not just hearing reports. And so I really want to stay away from just being the recipient of reports. But
Yes, you initiate things, is that what you're suggesting?
well, initiate, or whether or not we're approving, if there's shifts. And I think that to some extent, I think that there's been a shift in terms of what we do with reading. The summer school was a shift. The summer school compensation was a shift. And then also, what's happening this year to prepare us for next year. And then there'll be a shift next year, because we'll have to do something with, unless 100% make it. So
Absolutely.
So that would be a decision that has to include the full board, and I think approval at this level here. I don't know of other kinds of things. I'm not necessarily saying that we would initiate work. The teacher evaluation discussion did need to have our inclusion. I would like to know, that's not on this list, is what we're going to do with the Ottawa Hills High School Academies.
Yes, actually, I was reflecting on that today, so I think that's something that needs to come before you relatively quickly. And
Yeah,
Well, we have a process for how that comes
Correct.
before us now.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So now that things are settling down a little bit, we will ensure that we get those plans in front of you relatively quickly. Of
Rodney
course,
looks eager right now.
he's ready to go.
Yep.
Well, and as you were presenting these, you mentioned that these are the things the state holds us accountable
Correct.
for. So to me, as a board member, I would like to know, how do they hold you accountable? What are you accountable for
Sure.
producing in each area? And how are we, as a district, making sure that we prove ourselves in those areas? So, I mean, in some sense, that is presentation form. But I think what I'm missing is, how does the state hold you accountable for that SAT? What are
Great
what are the
point.
requirements? That type of thing.
So there was a time when many of our schools were on the state's watch list, so to speak, right? Priority schools. If you think of Union High School, Dr. Nelson's behind me, as a result of some low levels of achievement at Union High School when he took over, he had to replace half of his staff, right? So Carl had the largest staff in the school district. They could adopt one of 4 models, and the model that was selected was replace the principal, replace 50% of the staff. So those are things that can happen. If you think of schools right now that are essentially on the state's watch list, I think of Alger, right? So Alger's a school where we have a new administration. We are ensuring that we have many structures in place to ensure students are achieving. It's one of our lowest achieving schools, and we're hoping not for too long. But that is a school where the state comes in periodically to monitor our progress, much like the fund balance, right? So as you know, we have to have a fund balance of 5% or above. If we do not, then the state comes in and provides oversight over your district. So those are some of the ramifications. Again, there was a time when there were 15, 20 schools on the state's watch list or considered priority schools. We've gotten that down to a small number now, but that is good to go, Ms. Lewis? You need to get that?
I was looking for
You can
it.
just ignore it.
Okay, I will.
Okay. So when I think of how we're being held accountable, these are reasons. And although it did not happen in September, It's going to happen this year where there is the A through F grading system for every single school, which is going to be a dashboard by which all of our schools have a letter grade. And what are the ramifications of that particular grading system? If if there is a school in the district that has all A's, my assumption is they're not going to have challenges with enrollment. If there's a school that has all F's, I assume we're going to have a difficult time filling that building. So in addition to the state coming in, providing oversight, closing schools, restructuring models, we also have to think of some new legislation that impacts us from a recruitment and retention and enrollment perspective. So I hope that answered some of it.
It sounds like it raised more questions. So,
But it's a start to what I'm.
Yeah. And
I mean, I have lots of questions, and I can research a little bit on my own. But
well, you don't need to do that. You tell us what you need, and we'll bring it to you.
okay.
okay. But that is a good. I mean, that would be a really good. Is that what? What are the oversights? And what are basically the points at which we have to worry about schools? And so, and even if we have board members that don't know which schools are on the watch list, this used to be, I mean, it's kind of nice that we have this situation, but it used to be like it was such a large number of our schools that it was just, it was what we talked about every time we met. And we talked about that as much as we talked about the fund balance. Now, we don't hear about it as much, but then as a result of that, we don't know what the points are that we need to worry about.
The 4 high schools, Ottawa Hills, Union, Creston, are central. There was not one of them that made adequate yearly progress, right? Over a period of time, all of them started to make adequate yearly progress.
I'm sorry.
And again, if you get to a phase 7 non-AYP school, now this is back during the old AYP model, your building could be closed. You could lose your principal. You could lose your staff. So what I'm hearing is with Alger right now being on the state's watch list, what does that mean? Right, so I can give you more description.
And what steps are we taking
Absolutely.
to get them off?
We can focus on that particular school if you like, because we don't have many on that list anymore. But those schools are held to a higher standard.
And I think that has been something that when we have talked about this, Alger has been a school that we wanted to make sure that we focus on improving.
And I'm hearing that when you say highlight success stories in our district, you're taking those success stories and hopefully using what we know about those schools to transfer over, is what I'm hearing you say. Like, let's highlight those.
It is exactly what I'm saying, because I think far too often people believe that in many instances, because we serve lots of kids in poverty, that we're going to have 1 or 2% proficient schools. And what I'm saying is there are examples within our school district where the poverty rates are over 80%, where we're making nice strides.
Yes.
Right? And I think it can be done across the entire district. Are there places where it's more difficult than others? Absolutely. But it is being done in some of our schools. So I'd love to share those data with you.
I think that for if we're not working too far out, so for next meeting, it sounds like it would be nice. I think that this committee would be a good place for the to have a discussion around oversights. And so we'll just make it that broad. What are, all the different levels of schools, but then also then to laser in on Alger. And then I don't know if we can talk about it when we meet, but whether or not we can do the academies at the next meeting or not. Yeah, that might be pushing it.
Where are we in the teacher evaluation? What's happening?
Well, that we're basically waiting until after this study is done.
So it's ongoing. That is taking place.
That will come back to it in the spring.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe we presented that last time, the full plan, timelines, et cetera.
Yeah. So. Then I am also meeting with with the president to discuss what she would like from the Academic Achievement Committee to be discussed at our next work session.
Okay.
And the teacher evaluation plan will be part of it. And I think that I think that we should do something with the 3rd grade reading. that that should be part of it as well.
Makes
And
total
that- and
sense.
What we're doing with that. Also, the other thing would be the academies. So we never have actually, even though we never have actually had the full board approve that academy plan, the process for the plan. So that needs to be full, and that was going to go to work session before it was approved. So we need to
Did the
do
whole
that.
board approve the teacher evaluation thing?
There wasn't anything to approve. Yeah, it's just that we had discussions about it. The superintendent presented a plan for what would come back to us, and it would be really, the study would be the bulk of, with any recommendations that the study found. Some
No,
different changes.
I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm wondering whose responsibility is it to really take a look at teacher morale and find out, because I truly believe the happier a teacher is, the better a teacher she is, and the more kids are going to learn. And the one thing I do hear a lot is that, there are a lot of teachers who are not happy, a lot of teachers who are planning to leave the profession, and I worry about, just little things that we might be able to do to say, you are important. I mean, you're the, outside of the kids, they're the most important things we have in this district, and I'm just wondering, where does it belong? Where does that discussion belong as far as, I don't say rewarding them in terms of money or anything, but just to make them feel like they're important, and where can we do that? And where should that discussion be held?
Well, one area that kind of ties with that in my mind is professional development on classroom management and professional learning opportunities, which is one of the 5 that you presented. I just see those tying into all of the above. And when a teacher, this is just me speaking, I feel like when a teacher feels that their professional development directly relates to their classroom, it does boost morale. And I think it could affect all of the things we've talked about today.
Absolutely.
So I don't know where our role fits into that, but
So you're suggesting that we have to have really meaningful, teacher-directed professional development?
yeah, and also professional development that makes a teacher feel like they can be successful in their everyday lessons. So I was really excited about that being on the academic plan goal, and I think that could directly affect everything else on the plan. So, so that's where I see it kind of fitting in to our committee, but I'm not positive what our role in that topic would be.
I do think that there's lots of ways we end up discussing that, and so when we discuss contracts and when we discuss teacher evaluation, I mean, the things that, we do hear about individual things that we discuss, and I think that the conversations I heard about the teacher's evaluation led me to wanting to have a broad conversation in here about teacher evaluation, and that seems to affect it. The teacher evaluation, though, if it's the only thing that rewards that explains to a teacher whether or not they're doing a good job, is problematic. So then we have to do others, and I think that that's something that is a long conversation with the superintendent. And in a board, every time you get a chance, that it's a concern about it. It's just like, I mean, it's just really like when we hear about concerns about, if I hear concerns over time about something that people in the district complain about, then we should be talking to the superintendent. And it should also inform our conversations in work sessions and in here, so. But about, I think, specifics, so teacher evaluation, whether or not professional development is relevant, whether or not teachers have appropriate compensation, whether or not teachers feel appreciated. I mean, I think that all of those things,
appreciation.
So, but for, so I want to make sure I was clear, because I had my notes down here are
I don't know how
not
you
possible.
followed.
So for us, for this committee, we'll discuss the next couple committee meetings focusing on the ways oversight happens at the state level for these areas. and perhaps whether or not, when we'll do the academies.
Correct.
For the full board, in terms of our work session coming up, where we'll look at it, we will have to formally adopt the academy approval process. We will inform the rest of the board on where we're at with the teacher evaluation discussion. And then I think that we said, and then the third grade reading. So
Sounds good.
I'll mention that to them. So is that good?
Absolutely.
I think it's great to hear about the summer, and so I was glad that we heard you guys back in the spring suggest it, and it's, I think that the numbers of participants and the numbers of, the attendance levels were pretty impressive, especially since the middle school and elementary school kids just still choose not to, each day.
They may have parents who don't allow them to make a choice.
Well, that's great then. That's great.
what we want.
And then also to hear about where we're at with third grade reading, and I really appreciate the work that's been done on the individual reading plans. Sounds pretty impressive. And again, when I think back on what I notice, this could fix problems I've heard about in the past. So I'm really happy about that. And I think it will in the long run. It'll be a long time before it affects that SAT score, but I do think it will end up having a huge impact, because I'm convinced that even with math, reading ends up having a huge issue with students' ability to learn math as they get to the older grades. So, all right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.